us for our virtual Coalition Academy. My name is Abby Boser. I'm with Prevention First, and I have the pleasure of introducing Chris Connors with the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, and he'll be going over the drug trends in the tri-state. And I know we might have some other people outside of the tri-state within Cincinnati, Ohio. We've had some people as far as Nevada, out west, and New York and New Jersey joining us virtually for our first day of our virtual conference. So we welcome anyone outside of the general tri-state Cincinnati area. And for those that aren't aware of where the tri-state is, it's conveniently located in Cincinnati, Ohio, like I mentioned. So that's southwest Ohio, southeast Indiana, as well as northern Kentucky. And Chris Connors, after 25 years with the Cincinnati Police Department, he retired in May of 2015, and he accepted the position as the executive director of the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, where he now works. And the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force is a drug investigative task force made up of agents assigned from various law enforcement agencies in Boone, Campbell, and Kenton counties, and in Northern Kentucky. As the commander, he petitioned for the task force to be a part of the federal high-intensity drug trafficking area program. And as of January 2017, the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force was included with the Ohio HIDTA program and is a HIDTA task force. Director Connors is also a current board member of the Northern Kentucky Office of Drug Control Policy. So thank you, Chris, for being with us today. And if you don't care to advance to the next slide. So I'm going to go over a few housekeeping notes. So continuing education will only be awarded for those that view this live session. You must attend the entire training to receive continuing education hours. Post-event evaluation surveys are required to receive continuing education, and that survey will be sent out automatically to all of the attendees within 24 hours. For social work and mental health counselor credits, you must provide your license number in the post-event evaluation survey. And for CHES or certified health education credits, you must provide your CHES ID in the post-event evaluation survey. And you will receive your certificate for continuing education by email within 30 days of the training. And for those getting prevention credits, those will also be automatically emailed. You don't need to include your certified prevention specialist license number. It's just for social work and CHES that we need those license numbers. So Chris, we can go ahead and get started to your first slide, and I can, if you want to introduce anything else, or whenever you're ready, we can start the first poll to engage with the audience.
Very good. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I started my law enforcement career in 1984, which sounds very sad. But of my 37 years in law enforcement, 30 to 31 have been spent in a investigative capacity, and by and large, drug trafficking investigations, to include my radio is going off. 1 second. Sorry about that, everyone. A little new to this virtual stuff. Yeah, so I've investigated Colombian cartel organizations, and all the way down to street level drug trafficking cases where undercover buys are made and so forth. So I wanted to do something a little different. We're all in this very, very strange time in our history, I guess, my best way to put it. And for the last several months, people have been asking me what's going on in the streets because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, nationwide or international pandemic. And for the first several months, we really did not see a whole lot of change. It was business as usual. Of course, we had to take extra precautions, obviously, but the prices and the availability of all the illicit drugs were primarily the same. So, but that has changed in the last 2 to 3 months. And it's pretty typical of the Midwest as we see everything that comes from both the East and West Coast. It's just a little slower getting here. Sometimes that's a good thing. So in either case, so I kind of collected some data to see how the rest of the country and the region were doing in reference to this pandemic. And so let me make sure I'm on the right one. So I look at how the current pandemic has impacted drug production, drug distribution, and drug abuse. And before I get started, I want to add that we are both on kind of the same part of the attack on drug abuse and how it's affecting our communities and whatnot. We often do in this line of work, we do drug awareness, drug prevention, drug education presentations such as this, where we go to schools and community groups and even corporate locations to just kind of say what's going on and what we see. So any case, so in doing so, we kind of get a feedback from you all and find out what you guys are seeing, because we don't necessarily deal with the drug users. We deal with primarily the traffickers, and that's kind of our role. So I'm glad to be on your team and glad to learn from all of you. So what we're seeing and
Chris, did you want to do the poll to get an idea of where people are coming from and what they're seeing in their area before this, or do you want to do it later?
I thought I'd just get through this, and then I want to kind of speed through it, and then we'll have questions. If anybody has questions of me, and I would like to have a poll so I can maybe get some feedback of what all the prevention people are seeing out there. And so.
Sorry, I'll hold on.
I don't care.
Yeah, I'll hold on. We can do it later.
Okay. All right. So some of the measures implemented to help with the pandemic have also obviously affected the economy, and of course the economy also affects the drug trade. And drug trafficking obviously relies heavily on legal commerce to hide within there. And here domestically, majority of the drugs are transported over the road and commercial trucking. Now we see it through the airline carriers, we see it through the mail, and we see it even just over the road in cars. But by and large, it's transported just like every other commerce, of course, with some measures to hide it. So I started doing some research internationally to see what everybody else was seeing, and the problem they're having in these countries that manufacture the opium is they're having problems getting the chemicals because of the tighter borders. So nothing in Mexico, but in Afghanistan, obviously. So and synthetic drugs like fentanyl, which most of us are aware of, is the same exact thing. They're having problems getting the chemicals, many of which come from the United States, and our borders are closed. And the Chinese tend to distribute some of these chemicals as well. So the close and tighter borders have its impact on mobility, and along with that, it's impacting what we're seeing in the streets. But I will say this, because of what I found was because of those tighter restrictions, some of those borders or the countries that have where the manufacturing is being done, they're seeing increased seizures. And what I think is that they're just looking closer. They're looking, they've kind of tightened up their attitude with moving freely through the borders. So because of that, they're seeing increased production, or excuse me, increased large seizures. So But what the intelligence bulletins are reading is that the drugs are being stockpiled on both sides of the border. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. But basically they're saying, let's just sit on it and hold off until see what happens with this pandemic. So as a result, the destination markets like Northern Kentucky, Ohio, the Midwest, or anywhere in the country have noted smaller seizures, increased prices, and purity reductions. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to what's happening locally and regionally. So, but I did want to touch on this a little bit about the side effects. So, and in the big picture, you might say, well, good, the drugs are harder to get and they're less pure, and you know, the prices are increased. That says they're less available. That's all those are good things, right? But they have side effects, and the side effects, those people with the drug use disorders. So because of that, they might use a different type of drug. So someone that was just using pills or founding heroin, they'll resort to fentanyl, or they'll switch to meth. But even worse is they might resort to other types of behavior. So this is all stuff I got from the United Nations mostly, is that the universal restrictions are a lot of course, air travel, vehicle transport. Now we're seeing an increase, and we're seeing that here locally too, a large increase in parcel services. A lot of the drugs, and we've seen the parcel services, FedEx, UPS, United States Post Office. We're seeing a lot of that being used more than it even was before, which it's a very popular method to distribute because you kind of protect yourself. Now you might take losses, but they build losses into their profit, the cartels do. So, and this particular region, DHL is at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. So all the stuff that comes in from overseas goes through that DHL hub, at least for this region. And they're seeing less, but I think like I said earlier, they're catching at the borders. But according to this Intel report, we're seeing an overall decrease in drug use. But again, the side effect of that might be those drug dependent people. Now, because of the higher cost and less availability, they might resort to other behaviors that are dangerous behaviors, robbery, theft, burglary, and prostitution. So all these have always gone hand in hand with drug addicted persons. And but when the price is low, maybe they don't have to engage in those illegal and dangerous activities as much. But so that might be one side effect that comes from it. So I wonder, and then this is something you all can maybe tell me, is because the United States government and the state governments are paying so much attention to this pandemic, are the services for drug dependent people being restricted or lessened? Is the money not flowing towards them? And that's a little scary, that because we've made a lot of headway since the heroin epidemic started, and I hope those funds are not diverted to other places, which I'm not saying they're not needed there, but it could be detrimental to all the strides that have been made by people like yourself and the treatment and recovery and outreach people. So it also increased the demand for other drugs that sometimes come domestically. Methamphetamine, by and large, now is coming from Mexico, but marijuana is a domestic product, and so is THC. And we are seeing a large increase in THC products. And by and large, they're coming from the legal states, Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington. They're sending them back to the states where they're still illegal. And you've heard this said several times, that this is not your your mom and dad's, or even nowadays your grandma and grandpa's marijuana. This is some very strong stuff. And the THC products that we're seeing, primarily vape cartridges, which contains THC oil. It's usually 80 to 95%. And so one hit off of a vape cartridge is a unit dose, and it's a lot more powerful than a whole, any of the drugs we saw even up and through the 90s and 2000s. So there's something I wanted to say internationally, still speaking internationally, that these cartels will figure this out. It is profit driven, and they will figure out and adapt new strategies to overcome these COVID measures. And like I said, the drugs are being stockpiled on both sides of the border. So, and once again, it's not like we can't find it. We're finding it. We're still doing undercover and controlled purchases of all these drugs. But some things they might switch to, which they kind of already have, at least in some markets, is the dark net. If any of you have what they call a Tor browser, Onion's one of the biggest. You can go online and find anything you want on the dark web, anything. Sex trafficking, murder for hire. They'll show pictures of their meth or fentanyl right there on the dark net. There is a team in Cincinnati working with the FBI, and I don't really know what they do, but I know they search the dark net all day for those trafficking. And there's been a couple cases of these distribution organizations, but you can imagine how hard it is to work them, because the dark net is there to protect identities and search browsing. So like I said earlier, there's stockpiling of drugs. Another side effect of what's going on with the COVID restrictions is that they're stockpiling this. As soon as the restrictions are lifted, there's fear that the market will be overwhelmed, and it will be at such a low price that it will impact the people you are trying to reach in the prevention strategies. They're going to reach the new users because of the low price, and that's a possible side effect. And I guess it's upon us to try and curtail that when this does happen, and that's their prediction. And then, of course, the economic downturn. Sometimes, and I don't know if this is true. I read this and I thought to myself, it's not just the poor, socially, economically deprived population that is involved in drugs nowadays. Rich Hollywood and rich moguls and all walks of life, young, old, are involved in abuse of these illicit drugs. So, but studies have shown, I guess, throughout the past that in economic downturns in this country or during inflation, that it creates an environment conducive for drug abuse. So I don't know if that's the case lately, but that's a fear of a side effect that might, because of some economic downturn that's caused by this pandemic, that might open us up to these dangers. So, and then of course I talked about this earlier. It could lead to reduction because the U.S. government is or the country is in an economic downturn. There might not be as much money to go around, and the budgets might be cut. I hope not, because that will in fact affect me as well. I mean, we rely off of grants just like a lot of you all rely on grants, and if those grants are done away with, and it certainly will hurt our mission. I wanted to, this was just something, every month I get a seizure report from the Southwest borders. And so they are still making seizures. And in the past, drug interdiction kind of says we get about 10% is interdicted. So if that's the case, they're at the Southwest borders during the month June 1st through June 30th, 39 seizures, cannabis, one of plants, 57 incidents of cocaine, and then you see the amounts as well. So they're still getting 264 kilograms of fentanyl in a month. It's a little less than what it used to be, but it's not anything drastic. But it's still coming through, and we're still seeing overdoses, and I'm sure you guys are hearing about them as well. So let's talk about what's going on here regionally, locally. Here at the Strike Force, we work with the DEA, the FBI, the ATF, Homeland Security, HSI. We work with all those investigative entities, and that we'll be investigating someone, and then of course our investigations will bump into each other, meaning something they're doing has led them to that as well. So I got a question now. Okay. In either case, so methamphetamine. So in 2015, when I first started this, and when I came from Cincinnati drug unit, methamphetamine was very hard to find. It was about 40–50% pure, and it was about $2,000 an ounce. And throughout my years, when I try to get a handle on what's going on, I think the best yardstick or barometer for how much drugs are out there is I look at the price of an ounce. Now that is a wholesale dealer. Normally people that sell ounces do not often use the drug. They're wholesalers, but those that are buying them might be involved in both use and trafficking to support their habit or support their lifestyle or whatever. So I checked with some other, so let me back up. It was about 2,000 an ounce back in those days. And even in California back in those days, it was probably, and when I say those days, it really wasn't that long ago, it was 4 or 5 years ago. An ounce, a pound of methamphetamine was going for about $5,000 to $8,000. Just last year, it was $900 a pound. That's what they were seeing in California. And now it's about 2,000 a pound, still very cheap. So here locally, Vic Brown, who's works for Appalachia HIDTA, we're with Ohio HIDTA, says the street level has increased. I can tell you it's still available here. The quality is still good, and the prices have jumped drastically. So like I said, 2,000 an ounce back in 2015, 2016. And right before this COVID hit, say first of the year, February even, we paid about $350 to $450 an ounce. It is now about $750 to $800. We bought some just the other day for $780 for an ounce. So the price has doubled, but it's nowhere near. And I will say this, the quality is still the Mexican quality, 80–90% pure. It's not like that. In 2000, the quality was about 40–50% pure, and it was often domestically manufactured. Now what we're getting is it's ice, if you will, and all ice means is that it's of a purity of greater than 80%. And all the cases we've done recently, most of which have gone federal, we've sent them to the federal labs, and not a one has come below 80%. I think the lowest one we have is 84, but most of them are in the 90s. So this is very pure, very professionally made methamphetamine, and it's all Intelligent Bulletin says it's cartel manufactured and distributed. So what else? Marijuana, we're seeing it more and more. And it's more potent, I said about that. But we're seeing the THC products. I don't know if any of you guys have seen in your travels, the wax, they call it dab. You see the gummies and the candy, and more prominently is what we're seeing is the oil or the wax. And this is 70 to 90% tetrahydrocannabinol pure, and very, very potent. So each cartridge that they would use to fill the vape pens, or the vape dispensers, if you will, is about 40 to 70 puffs from this vape cartridge, and each puff might be equivalent to smoking a joint or even two of very potent marijuana. So they've gotten around, and those of you that work in high schools, I want to tell you that I kind of checked into this, and the high schools were taking these vape pens from the kids, and they pretty much just throw them in a box, and I don't know if they get suspended or detention or what happens to the high schoolers, but they catch them with these vape pens and they throw them in a box. I would be willing to bet you that if we were to test those, and we can't, we would overwhelm the state and federal labs. If we were to test those, I would say probably 9 out of every 10 are marijuana and not nicotine. The ones that are nicotine are your Juuls. I can't think of the other famous commercial brand. Those commercial ones that come from Big Tobacco, they might be nicotine. Anything else, these dispensers, they're THC. And here's the problem with that is parents, and your line of work, parents don't know, they think their kid's smoking nicotine, which is, oh, it's better than cigarettes. It doesn't have all the other stuff in it. Well, you've seen all the media on some of the people that are getting lung disease. By and large, those lung diseases are not coming from the Juul vape pens. They're coming from the aftermarket vape pens with THC. And I did a little research into it and found out the reason is because the cartridges themselves are being sent from China, and they're using a lesser metal, which causes those respiratory issues. Back in the 50s, and I can't think of the name of it, it's like, it's a lesser metal that even welders in the 50s were having lung issues and respiratory problems. So they got rid of that product. Well, the Chinese are using it to make their vape pens, the metal parts on their vape pens. So when they're heated up to 300 and 400 degrees with these dispensers, they're also inhaling not just the burning THC oil, or this cadmium, I think it's called, something like that. And it's so caused all those respiratory problems. I haven't heard too much about it lately, but trust me, we're seizing hundreds and thousands of these vape cartridges with THC oil. So the kids or even adults are still using it. So we're also seizing a lot of hemp that and many of the states are allowing hemp farms and hemp production. Each state is different, and there lies a problem. So in Kentucky, it's 0.399% or less. Some states are way different. We seized about 500 pounds that came into UPS, and it was about 1.9% pure, which is illegal in Kentucky. That's still considered marijuana. So I don't know what they're trying to do, whether they're legitimately trying to start the hemp business, or the fact is they were doing it illegally because there's only so many people in each state that are licensed to do that. So, but we're seeing that too. I talked about the coming from the legal states, the West Coast primarily. So cocaine, it's harder to get, it's more expensive, and many of the dealers were involved in a like a year-long investigation of a cocaine drug trafficking organization, and they're saying they can't find it, so they're going to switch to selling marijuana and meth. So hallucinogens are more prevalent now than I've seen in years. We did several cases where we were buying ecstasy and we tested it and they didn't test positive for ecstasy, and then we send it back and they tested positive for meth. So that's the nutshell. This is kind of what we're seeing. I did want to go back one. Here's what you all as prevention people, or treatment people for that matter, need to be aware of is we've been responding to overdoses still, so we're still seeing overdoses. What we're primarily seeing from these overdoses is pills. So we're looking at the pills and we're checking them. and they're being sold as Percocet or Xanax or some other type of narco or some other type of opioid. What they really are is handmade, hand-pressed pills with fentanyl. And that's where we're seeing the overdoses nowadays. So buyer beware, if you will. It's not hard to see that they're not from pharmaceutical industries. They're very imperfect and the edges are kind of messed up. So when we're seizing them, they might look like Percocet, without looking at them too closely, but when you look at them closely, each one's a little different. That's not how Big Pharma does it. So you can kind of see some of our stats have gone down with seizures, and especially in the last 3 months. And MDMA has gone way up. So we're seeing a lot of the hallucinogens. And I combine MDMA and LSD, so we're seeing a bunch of that. All right, so listen, I kind of just did this last couple slides, and then we'll open up to polls and questions. But this is the kind of way I see it. If you see you and I over here on the left, lower left, education, awareness, availability, that's kind of what we do in law enforcement, aside from enforcing the laws on the books and locking people up, primarily the traffickers. And the prevention people, we're both in our duties, those duties are trying to get to the new users so they can not enter that drug dependent population. So there's certain ways to get out of that population. And trust me, every region has a drug dependent population. And I don't know that will ever go away. What we want to try to do is shrink it. So the ways out is through arrest or incarceration. I mean, let's face it, that does work, but at what cost? And we're not trying to, not that we're decriminalizing drug abuse, but there is a push to do that, and I couldn't agree with it more. Drug dependent people often at most stages don't want to be drug dependent. They can't kick it. So, and that's what brings in the outreach and the treatment and recovery people. So that's another way out of that population. And sadly enough, the negative way is drug overdose and death. Those are the ways that the population might shrink. But in our duties as awareness and education and prevention is we need to get to the new users before they can get to that population so we can shrink it. So if you notice in the last slide, the arrows, and that was by design, I'm not that clever, but I thought, we sometimes have problems getting to those new users and keeping them away from the drug dependent population. But if you notice in this slide, if we do a better job, we can we're never going to stop it, but we can keep them away from that, from starting and using and then becoming dependent. And in doing so, in the outreach and treatment and recovery, if we can swell those, maybe we don't need incarceration and arrest to shrink that population. Maybe the outreach and the treatment and recovery, along with the work being done on the prevention side, we can shrink this drug dependent population circle as you see it. And likewise, through the use of the Narcan and education and outreach and treatment and recovery, we can also shrink the OD deaths. And I think that's, I think we're all pulling in the right direction when we say this is what our mission is to shrink the population and shrink the OD deaths. And maybe even eventually the treatment and recovery can shrink because we're not needed as much. But I think that would probably be, phase 5 or the last phase, if you will. So in a nutshell, I want to say that I really appreciate everything you guys do. I've known Abby and maybe many of you that are out there I've met and worked with in the past. And what we try to do is keep those wholesale and interstate drug traffickers. We try to keep them hidden in the shadows. They know we're there. I want to make it hard for them to do what they do, because if those young kids or those new users might be reluctant if they have to go into dangerous dark alleys to buy this. But if they can get it anywhere, it's more prevalent, it's cheaper, then they're more apt to give it a try, if you will. So if we and the prevention people do our job, maybe together we can shrink that population. So thanks for everything that you all do, and hopefully if we keep going in the right direction, we won't see those side effects that I talked about earlier. So that being said, I think we got about 10 or so minutes left. We can do the poll or any questions. I mean, I'm not sure if I can see the questions, but can't hear you.
Hold on, I can go ahead and start the poll, and we can get that going. So the first poll, it should show up on your screen for all the attendees. So if you live and or work within the tri-state region, which area are you representing? So I know we do have a few people from outside this region, but if you do live or work within these areas, please share. And I will stop that in a few seconds. Okay.
Looks like Southwest Ohio.
Yeah, we have Southwest Ohio at 71%, Northern Kentucky at 26%, and then Southeast Indiana at 3%. And then I know Mary Frances is with Interact for Health, and she serves the whole tri-state region, and I do as well in my role. So I know there's some people that do serve multiple areas, and sorry about that. I should have changed the poll to multiple answers. We do have some other people from Southeast Ohio as well as Northwest Ohio. And Chris, I know you did a great job of giving kind of a national lens as well as a regional lens for all the drug trends. But just wanted to get an idea of who all we have with us. So Chris, did you want to point out anything or mention anything about this, or do you want me to move on to the next one?
Yeah, you're fine. I was born and raised in Claremont County before I moved to Los Angeles to start my career. But and then of course working with Cincinnati, I may have crossed paths with some of you. So thanks for coming. I hope you picked up at least one thing.
And now we're going to move on to the next one. What profession do you represent? So I kind of made a list of most of the ones we might see with us today. So if you represent the prevention profession, that can be as a coalition or prevention professional, coalition member. Law enforcement, I put government, public sector, treatment or recovery professional, and then none of the above. And then, yeah, I think most of us are from the prevention professions. I'm gonna go ahead and close that, share the results. So by and large, a lot more prevention, which is, this is a prevention conference, so that's not out of the ordinary. So once again, thanks for joining. And then the most engaging, I'm going to do the last one. And this is, you can select all that apply. So what drug trends are you seeing in your individual community? This can be within whatever, if you live there, work there, it can be kind of multifaceted, but what trends are you seeing currently in your community? We're seeing by and large a lot of marijuana, and then methamphetamine as well, and fentanyl is also close third. So I'm gonna give it a few more seconds and go ahead and.
Just so you know, heroin, we're, in the last year and a half, we've seized heroin, but it was always a heroin fentanyl mix. So, you know, we treat it all as fentanyl nowadays because it's so dangerous. So.
So yeah, I know on the youth lens, marijuana and alcohol are always really the top two substances. By and large, I think every report you've given, Chris, recently, that it's been more and more methamphetamine mixed with fentanyl, or just meth and fentanyl in general.
Well, I think overwhelmingly marijuana is the most prevalent drug, and always the legal drug, and always has been. And but because both the violence and the cartels are more involved in the methamphetamine and heroin and fentanyl and cocaine, we tend to try to work those more dangerous drugs, if you will. I'm not trying to make a political statement or advocate that marijuana is not, I mean, it's still illegal. So we go by the laws that are on the books here in Kentucky. But, you know, if someone were to ask me what investigation is more important, I would, if it was 10 kilos of heroin or fentanyl over 100 or 200 pounds of marijuana, of course, I would say the more illicit marijuana, or excuse me, heroin, fentanyl. Causes more deaths, I should say.
Definitely. So I am going to open the floor for any questions. Certainly we still have plenty of time. So people, you're more than welcome to add your question to the question box or raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can verbally ask your question for Chris. And please definitely share your response to some of the data that he shared. Any response, or did any of the information surprise you, or was that kind of pretty on point with what you're hearing on your end? Definitely let us know some comments on what you're seeing in your community if you live or work there.
Well, I will say I'm sorry. I'm sorry to see that I didn't get to meet you all at the Great Wolf Lodge. I was more looking forward to that than I am to looking at my computer. But you know,
we were too. Life. We normally have a very well-attended conference, and it's always good to see everyone in person. I personally miss that in-person interaction, but at least we're able to still keep things going.
Yeah, that's right.
So feel free to please add some questions. People are still quiet on the chat box, or raise your hand on the control panel and I can unmute you to see what you're seeing.
Well, I certainly appreciate everybody coming, and thanks to Abby for inviting me. I don't get to many of them. Well, nobody has lately, these meetings. We're coming to work business as usual. I've had like 4 of my agents quarantined from exposure, but just one of the agents actually tested positive about 3 weeks ago or 2.5 weeks ago, and he just came back Monday and is doing great. And I hope all of you out there that have been impacted by this, or family members, I hope they recover as well. And hopefully we'll be through this by this time next year at least.
Yeah. I do have a question from the question box. Do you feel that during the pandemic, using drugs and alcohol has increased? And I guess just in general, either with youth and or adults?
I think the obvious answer would be that it has. I'd like to see the studies of how much domestic violence has increased during this time period. And I don't know that those numbers are out yet. I can only answer to what, and of course I don't investigate those types of cases, but usually increased alcohol and exposure to one another brings about, family troubles. And I'd be curious to see if the calls for service for domestic violence have increased, in Hamilton County and Northern Kentucky and elsewhere for that matter. And my guess is it'll be uniform across the board, but I have no way of knowing that. Like you, whoever asked the question, I think that's probably obvious that that's going to, much like I think we might have a baby boom coming up as well from this pandemic. The people are all home together. Might be like the new baby boomers might be the next generation. I don't know.
And I'll also add on our end that I'm hearing from national and local sources, especially with the access to alcohol, with to-go beverages being allowed, with also alcohol delivery. I know in Ohio, they made that allowed during the pandemic, and they might even increase it to allow for those to-go beverages and for home delivery. And I know the purchase of alcohol through those sources skyrocketed, I think, by 50%. And, that could be just due to the convenience, just for ease of access. We don't know if that's particularly youth. We know if youth are more at home and having access to home delivery, they could have increased access. But I know I've certainly been tracking the overdose reports from the Hamilton County Public Health Department. And the overdoses in our community for Hamilton County at least have skyrocketed during the pandemic as well. And I know access to treatment was an issue too, with some recovery centers not being open to full capacity, or even people being unsure or if they're protected if they go to the hospital, of kind of if they're worried about getting COVID from a hospital. That was a big issue too. But the treatment community and recovery community has still kept up and tried to do outreach for their clientele. I'll say another question. So what can therapists or prevention professionals do to assist law enforcement more during current interactions? So I guess that question would be for you, Chris.
Well, you guys, in doing what you do, you might come across something, but you can't, I don't know that you can violate the trust with the clients you're working with. I see prevention and law enforcement are so intermingled because of how we do awareness type things at schools and community groups and so on and so forth. So, it seemed that treatment and outreach and stuff like that were, at least in the past, were at odds with law enforcement, but I don't think that's the case anymore. But prevention, since I started my career, have always been intermeshed with law enforcement. So I don't know that can be improved any. I think it's fine, and I hope it continues to be fine. I don't know why it wouldn't. While I got here, there was a typed message, and instead of me typing, I'll go ahead and answer the question. And it is dab or wax used medically in any state? I don't know that I can officially answer that because each state is different. I went on a vacation to Las Vegas about a year and a half ago, and they have recreational use marijuana products. So I wanted to educate myself, and I went in there, and they had a police officer that stood at the door and checked IDs and did all that stuff. So I sat and talked with him, and then I talked with one of the managers of the dispensary. It was, and what I learned was that they're very precise in the percentages of THC and what they recommend it to be used for, whether it's those medical issues like arthritis or or whatever they use marijuana for. I'm certainly not a doctor, even if it's anxiety and so forth. So yes, gummies and other edibles are used medically and recreationally, because some of those in those states, there are some people that aren't just using it to get high, they're using it because of whatever condition, whether it's pain management or whatever it might be. But I've yet to see the dab or wax, although you can buy smokable marijuana for recreational or medical use. And a lot of times they use vaporizers. That way it's not the same. You're not smoking. It's not like cigarettes where you're hurting your lungs through that type of ingestion. But I've yet to see dab or wax being used as any form of ingestion for this, other than illegally. So I'm probably not the best person to ask that question of, but I've yet to see it. It's an illicit form, and it's usually very, very potent, at least in our experience. And you can go online. I don't know that I should say this, but anybody can go online and find out the method of turning marijuana into wax. It's a butane method. It's very easy to do. It can be dangerous because you're taking a solvent and heating it with the marijuana, and it's very flammable. But so to answer your question, no, I have not. I don't know of any prescribed marijuana in that type of form. It's usually in some type of edible.
Yeah, and I will say from the Ohio standpoint, it is a medical approved state, that it's not, they don't allow for any physical plants or like a smokable form. It does have to be in an edible or a cartridge. So I just encourage you, if you don't know what's currently available or legal in your state, to look that up, either recreational or medically. Every state's kind of changing, and nationally there are a lot more states that are approved for medical or recreational use. So just look that up on your individual state. And then I'll just piggyback on the previous question for how prevention professionals can work more with law enforcement. If you do have a drug-free coalition in your area, or you're not already a part of one, I certainly encourage you to look that up and try and get involved with a drug-free coalition in your area. A lot of times they already have law enforcement at the table, or if you already are part of a drug-free coalition and law enforcement is not involved, I definitely recommend. Chris, you've been a great partner. I was a previous drug-free communities coordinator in Florence, Kentucky, and I had you present almost every 6 months, and you've always had great information, and your office, as well as local law enforcement in my county I worked in, was always a great partner. And a lot of schools do have school resource officers that do above and beyond for students and for their school they're assigned to. So certainly law enforcement's a great partner for us and for the prevention field. And a lot of times they do direct prevention services in the school. And then we do have a comment that thanks for illuminating the update. Had no idea that prices doubled. Honestly, I had no idea that the meth prices doubled either since, well, recently. So that was a big learning curve for me too. But if there's other questions, please add them, or feel free to add that, raise your hand if you wanted to verbally ask a question. But yeah, I guess a question for you, Chris, are you seeing any other emerging trends right now, or is it kind of already what you already expressed with what you're seeing on the streets right now?
Yeah, I think just what I talked about, the pressed pills. We're doing a lot of the pressed pills, and so I think a lot of the opioid dependent people know that they're that they're fentanyl and they use them accordingly. But some people might think they're really getting Percocets because their prescriptions ran out, or that's was their drug of choice to use illegally. But even we had some Xanax. Xanax isn't even an opioid. I think it's it's used in the psychological field, for anxiety or whatnot. But that's the scary one that we're seeing is if the user thinks they're taking Xanax or Percocet or whatever other drug they think it is. Because they're made to look almost identical, but if you look closely, they're not. So that would be the scary part of what we're seeing now, and that weird phenomenon that when I talked about this we bought over 1,000 hits of MDMA ecstasy from a particular organization we're investigating, and so I thought, well, this is weird, and what I found out was that there was a similar case in the Panhandle of Florida where they were selling the pills as ecstasy, but they were actually methamphetamine. And the only thing I can think is that because it's cheaper and easier to get a hold of, they press it into these little blue pills with a picture of Mickey Mouse on them or whatever, and selling it as ecstasy. Now, someone using ecstasy all the time might say this was an ecstasy, but to most ecstasy users attending a concert or a bar or whatever, that those 20-somethings that tend to use that type of illicit drug, they might not know the difference. There is a euphoric effect that comes with very strong methamphetamine. So.
And Chris, I know historically those drugs like MDMA, ecstasy, LSD, they've been historically more of the party drugs, and I guess more so popular at music festivals. Have they been more so just popular in general during the pandemic, just with everyone being at home, or what are you seeing the cause and effect of the upstream in that?
Well, I know they're not having the music festivals, so I wouldn't know as to where they are being used. But you're right. Traditionally, the LSD and the MDMA and MDA are all your party atmosphere type drugs, and the club scenes even. But none of that's been happening. So. And our seizures have actually increased of these hallucinogens. So I don't know what's going on with them. Maybe when we start we haven't done what we have done during this pandemic. We've made some arrests, but by and large, we're developing our cases and obtaining offenses on a lot of the targets, but we're not necessarily arresting them, and and protection of us and others that we're kind of holding off on arrest enforcement actions. Not entirely, but in some cases. Of course, if there's something dangerous going on out there, we do our search warrants, we do our arrests, we just take the extra precautions. So I guess maybe a year or so after all this is over, we'll get some of those answers.
Well, thank you. I do have another question from the question box. What drug category is marijuana, stimulant, depressant, hallucinogen?
What schedule or what category?
What drug category, stimulant, depressant, hallucinogen?
Well, it varies. The hallucinogens, by and large, are Schedule 1, which means, and we have to be careful of when we describe the schedules. Like in Ohio, marijuana has always been a Schedule 1, and that doesn't mean it's the worst. What that means is there's no legitimate medical use, and that was for years in most states. So you hear the pro marijuana legalization say, "Oh, it's the same as heroin, or it's the same as methamphetamine." It's not the same. It's put in a category because of it falls into the description of Schedule 1, no legitimate medical use. Now, Schedule 2 Fentanyl is a Schedule II drug. Many of you have probably had fentanyl post-surgery. It's a very legitimate analgesic. But they've learned how they've reverse engineered it, and they've learned how to make it illicitly. And that's one we have to be afraid of. So some amphetamines are Schedule II and Schedule III, but not all of them. Methamphetamine is considered a stimulant, and it's a Schedule I because there's no legitimate medical use. But it wasn't always Schedule I. It was prescribed at one time. Cocaine is a Schedule II. It's still commonly used in ear, nose, and throat procedures. It does a great job, much like lidocaine or novocaine for dentists. It's also a numbing agent. So it varies. Most opioids are Schedule II because of and the definition of Schedule II means there is a medical use, but it has a high potential for abuse and addiction. So that's what falls into Schedule II, and that's why your Percocets and your narco and fentanyl are all in Schedule II, because they're dangerous, but they do have a legitimate use. And marijuana, like I said, I don't know what those states that have legalized them, whether they've even the scheduling by and large comes from the federal government, and then each state kind of adopt that. So I don't know what they've done in California and Washington and Oregon and Massachusetts with how they've scheduled marijuana because it's available recreationally. Like alcohol is obviously a drug. It's a depressant and can be an analgesic, but it's not scheduled. So there's a lot of drugs out there that can be dangerous that aren't even scheduled. They're just prescribed. So you can go to websites and find out any drug, and it'll tell you what schedule it is, the propensity for abuse and or addiction. And I do that still because there's so many out there.
Yeah, I'll also say from what I've heard from some states is that they've decriminalized marijuana if they've made it recreationally legal or medical. So they might have decreased that drug category, but for medical use federally, it's not been proved the FDA essentially has not approved it to be medical medical property. So the states have been just doing their own sort of legalization and just depending on that scheduling. But yeah, once again, it just depends on what the state regulations are.
And marijuana's been decriminalized in Ohio since I came back from LA in 1990. Less than 100 grams was the same as a parking ticket. You paid a fine, but it didn't go on as a criminal offense on your record. So many states have been doing that for years, even before the big push for legalization or medical legalization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so someone still piggybacked off the question, why is it still Schedule I if other states view it as having medical benefits? That's once again the FDA, because of all the years that it takes for the research and to become an FDA approved property. It takes a while for that. Nationally, we're just not there. But I will say marijuana, I guess, Chris, can you just explain if it's a stimulant or a depressant on your end? I guess it kind of depends on which form of marijuana.
Well, marijuana is certainly not a stimulant. I mean, it falls under depressant, but it's the strength of it now could also fall under hallucinogen. I mean, there's some say that marijuana is both a depressant and a hallucinogen. I think that's more recently, but much like PCP. PCP can be an analgesic, but it's a depressant, and it's also been known to be categorized as an hallucinogen. So some of those designer drugs have propensity for more than one more than one effect on the human body. And I mean, methamphetamine was created during, I think it was during World War I, to keep the German soldiers awake in the trenches. So it was used in World War II as well. Heroin was invented as a cough remedy. So by Bayer.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of that. A lot of times people talk about the two different forms of marijuana, like the categories. So marijuana can be sold as an indica or a sativa. So they say indica refers to in the couch. That's a common thing that I hear people talk about. And that basically means that it's more of a downer or a depressant. And then if it's a sativa, it's more of an upper. So you could hear it compared to a stimulant. But once again, like Chris was saying, with the hallucinogen properties, that if it does have that high THC content, especially in edibles, that it could have those properties. And certainly I know you hear on the media nationally and in a lot of the recreationally approved states that a lot of those THC contents are pretty high, and that people that could potentially overdose or have those adverse side effects to marijuana would definitely be a lot more with those high THC products. So it certainly does happen. And I also, I've been to a lot of different national conferences where they talk about the Rocky Mountain High Report, or it's from Colorado. So if you look at the HIDA report for that region, they have a lot of research to see what has kind of impacted that region since they became legal recreationally. I guess, how long ago was that, Chris, for Colorado and for?
Colorado and Washington were the first ones. And, you know, strangely enough, it was the same year that the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos played in the Super Bowl. And I'm lost. It's been several years now, but I don't know if there's any correlation there, by the way. But go back to your question. Is doesn't really, each state it does it differently, but in Ohio, I can tell you that the edibles, the wax, the oil fall in Kentucky, unfortunately doesn't have these type of laws on the books. The butter, the wax, the oils, hashish, all falls under concentrated cannabis, which means they've taken the marijuana plant and they've developed an extract, which means they've refined the THC and made it stronger. So those all fall under concentrated cannabis, and the thresholds for possession also have changed. And when I was in Cincinnati, I did several cases somewhere where we were getting 5 and 10 kilos of marijuana butter or marijuana wax, and that certainly put it in. It was as if they possessed 200 and 300 pounds of regular marijuana as far as the criminal offense goes. So Ohio has that. Not all states do. Kentucky does not. So a pound of hash or a pound of oil or a pound of wax in Kentucky is the same as having a pound of leaf marijuana. But it's certainly not the same amount. One goes a lot farther because it's concentrated.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also say, someone mentioned in the question box that it's decriminalized in Athens, Ohio, and I know it is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Yeah. I think if you have 20, I don't know what it is in Cincinnati. Chris, do you know? 100 grams. 100 grams. Okay. So I think if you're under that.
The citation.
Yeah, under that, I guess, threshold, it's a citation. So some states have decriminalized it, or a city, a province, a city could potentially decriminalize it. So, and I know Ohio's medical law, that they actually can't even bring it across state lines. So you have to have a state medical licensed to even get the medical property in Ohio. So they don't even recognize other states that potentially do have a medical card So Ohio's law is pretty good, honestly, compared to other states that
Yeah.
I've seen. So.
Well, those legal states are certainly affecting those states where it's illegal because they're sending it through the parcel services. We could be there at the UPS or FedEx we're there often, but we could be working interdiction every day, all day. Then we'd be neglecting the other drugs, but the cocaine and methamphetamine come through that way too. Just it's not as prevalent.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and change to the last. And if there's any other questions, definitely. We do have 5 more minutes. I want to go over the last evaluation slide. So Chris, I'm going to change to my make me the presenter, and then I'll put up that last evaluation slide. So, and then I guess, let me make sure everyone can see this. So Chris, are you seeing this?
It's prevention first,
Yeah.
post-training info. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I do want to explain that like I mentioned in the beginning, the evaluation survey for this particular training will be emailed within 24 hours after today. That's where you can add your license number for any social work, as well as any, if you're wanting CHES credits, add your number. And once again, for any prevention credential, CEUs, you'll just receive a certificate after the fact. They'll all be emailed within 30 days. And the recording for this, as well as any supplemental materials, will be available on our website. Our website is listed on this PowerPoint slide, but it's just prevention-first.org. You can follow us on social media. That's our tagline for Facebook as well as Twitter. We do post regularly about trainings and about alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use, and information for prevention professionals and the general community. Once again, I want to thank you all for joining today, and for Chris for your wealth of information, and for the engagement in the question box. And yeah, I guess, Chris, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, thank you for having me, Abby, and thanks to all you out there for what you do, and you can find me on our website, Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, if you search it, or you can find a number. It's 859-525-6272. If you ever have any questions to me, feel free. I should be here for at least another year or so.
Before your second retirement?
Yeah, might be time to call it. But we'll see. Never say never.
Yeah.
Thank you all for everything you do, and thanks for having me. I hope I was able to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you again, Chris. It was really good information as always. And someone mentioned that he can't get enough about working. So got a couple thank yous, and a lot of people said that it was very informative and helpful information. So
good.
So yeah, I think I'll go ahead and close everything out. So thank you again, Chris, for your time and for all the information.
Bye now.
Bye.